Hey, it's Storyworthy. Today on the show, comedian Rachel Lovey talks about being at Woodstock.
One of the best performances was Sly and the Family Stone. And, of course, Jimi Hendrix and Janis. And, there was so many, you just couldn't keep up with it. And everybody's sleeping together. Can you imagine all those people sleeping together? And it was... The interesting thing is that, where people ask me, were people stoned, were people on acid? Everyone almost was on acid. I did acid once.
Today on the show, comedian Rachel Lovey talks about being in the dance troupe at Woodstock. Stay close.
Hey, it's Rachel Lovey, and you're listening to Storyworthy.
Welcome to Storyworthy. My name is Christine Blackburn, and I'm coming to you from Los Angeles, California. Whether you're a longtime fan of the show of over 12 years or you're a new listener, welcome to Storyworthy. Now, I hope you guys enjoyed the show last week with Todd Hughes. Todd Hughes is a writer, producer, director, and he's so interesting. Holy cow. He's written and produced several documentaries about different icons like Cher, and now he's been writing one about Elizabeth Scott, who's a Hollywood screen siren from the 30s and the 40s, kind of like a Lauren Bacall. Anyway, last week he came on the show and talked about his first autograph not, meaning that he didn't get it when he asked for it. Anyway, there's so much to talk about with Todd Hughes. I know you guys are going to love our conversation and his story. So go back, you guys, and listen to Todd Hughes on Storyworthy last week. But not now. Stick around today, because today I'm here with another fabulous comedian who I haven't talked to in years, but I knew when I first moved to LA, and she is comedian Rachel Lovey. Hi, Rachel.
Hi.
I'm happy to talk to you. I know you bring forth the topic Woodstock, and I'm very anxious to hear the story because I know you were there, and I know it was instrumental in your life. So I'm so anxious to hear about Woodstock. But before that, tell me what has been going on in your life.
Okay, I'm still comedian, writing, of course, and doing some acting and producing. I was at the Comedy Store for 10 years. I ran the Belly Room. And I did a show called Women in Comedy Don't Have a Series Yet. And was...
Yeah, I remember that very well. That's kind of when I knew you back in the late 90s and the early 2000s. And that was a big show. That was a great show, Women in Comedy Who Don't Have a Series Yet. Lots of people came out of that. And I had my show there too at the same time. It was called Thursday Night Funnies. I did not call it that, by the way. My partner, Bobby Shropshire, she called it that.
Oh, wow, Bobby Shropshire, I remember her. Yeah, as a matter of fact, Fox picked us up a couple of times, and E! Entertainment did. They did, and a lot of articles were written about us. And what really is one of the first very popular woman shows. And,
yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
now, were you a regular at the Comedy Store as well?
Yes.
That's interesting. And do you remember your audition with Mitzi?
Oh, I remember many auditions with Mitzi. I had a partner once, and she wanted me to break up with him. And she comes into the room and she said, "You need to get away from him." And I went, "Shh, shh, shh, shh. He's right here." And you know what happened?
What?
"You really need to get away from him." It got louder, but she was both the most wonderful and most terrible person you ever met. She helped you and she hurt you at the same time. So it really was a real showbiz experience.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, no doubt. Did you have any dealings with her later in life? Like I know she passed about 7 years ago, but did you have any dealings with her, when she was 60s and 70s? Because she wasn't always as ill as she became,
Right, but she always had that split personality that went left, right at the same time, so you didn't exactly know where you were at. I bumped into her in Palm Springs, and we had lunch together. just so many stories. And, I was tight with the fellow that jumped, sad but true, the one that jumped off the Hyatt House.
Tell me about that.
Also, that was a guy named Steve Lubeck, and the sweetest guy you've ever met. Just never thought that would be the person, but maybe that was it. He was just so sweet and so nice. His brother was a psychologist who I kept in touch with afterwards. And me and Richard, I can't think of his last name, a very funny guy, are the only two people.
Belzer?
Excuse me?
Richard Belzer?
No, the other Richard, the neurotic one. Anyway, the only two that spoke at the funeral, the only two people that felt that they really knew him. And it was just too much. It was during the strike. And again, some people can't handle that left, right, good, bad. It's good that you're with the top crowd that's, marching in front of the Comedy Store, because that's what we did. We marched in front of the Comedy Store so the comics could get paid. And Bud Friedman's place, the Improv, had halfway burnt down. So he didn't get so much of the slack. So that's why he ended up at the roof on the Hyatt House and jumped down and jumped into the parking lot of the Comedy Store. He was a delightful person.
Okay, wait a second. Because, see, our audience isn't going to know this story.
Okay.
Basically, comedians went on strike against Mitzi Shore and the Comedy Store
and
to just try to get paid.
Right.
And Bud Friedman at the Improv. Right.
Just to get paid in general. And then I think there were some other clubs around. I can't remember the names of them offhand. So we went on strike, which meant that nobody was working at the store. Whoever was working at the store were actually it was a labor issue. Were actually crossing the picket lines.
Right. Now, who was crossing the picket line? Do you remember?
No. I'm not going to.
Interesting.
To this day, I do remember one person, and because he's a very good friend of mine. But as I said, I don't know whether he wants to still. He doesn't keep in touch with anybody.
Was the other Richard Jenny?
No.
Gosh, this is going to drive me crazy.
It's driving me crazy too. I know this person.
Okay, so just explain to me one more time.
Okay.
Why did Steve jump off the Hyatt? I know it was during the strike.
It was because he couldn't handle it. He could not handle the chance that this is, in my interpretation, and I've spoken to his brother, but that doesn't mean anything, who is a psychologist.
Well, that means a lot to me. Why wouldn't that mean anything?
It means something, and it doesn't mean that he had the skinny on what happened here. And
I know, but he grew up with them.
Right.
He might know his brother's state of mind.
He was quite a bit older. He could not handle that. Here is his opportunity to cross over into bigger time comedy, and now they're on strike, and Mitzi hated him. He thought he was delusional. Why would anybody do that? I think.
Right.
They're delusional.
Right. And Mitzi wouldn't hate him because Mitzi didn't care about anybody.
I know,
so
but
she wouldn't even.
People didn't understand that concept because everybody took it so personally, including myself. And as I said, it was left, right. She did more for me, and she could have brought me to the table, but I had to go to the table. I was right there. I was outside of the Carson show, whatever. But you have to do the rest of it. She'll give you anyway. That's
so when Steve jumped off the roof, what time of day was it?
I don't remember.
Do you remember, was the Comedy Store open or were there picketers outside?
It must have been after. I don't remember. It must have been, I think it was after the store was closed. I don't remember.
Yeah.
I still have the article.
That's just such.
I still have the article.
I'd like to hear that sometime. It's just so tragic that somebody lost their life, over comedy, essentially.
Oh, but hasn't so many lost their life over? Isn't it not just over comedy, but hasn't been comedy been a pivotal reason that they had lost their life?
I don't know. Tell me. What do you think?
I think comedy, what it did for me originally was make me relive every every negativity that I ever had, or anybody that ever put me down in my life. And I've been performing since I was 4 years old. I mean, I had and I was performing monologues at 4. I had
That's
an
hilarious.
aunt that wrote me psychologically inappropriate material. The first poem at 4 was No Hope.
Oh my gosh, what was that all about?
But just that thing. I think it stirs up all that stuff. Comedy gives you that neurotic edge where you have to express yourself. Even if your comedy isn't about neuroses, there's a certain edge that you get if you are a neurotic person that it makes it easier to speak about your whatever issues or whatever views you have.
So I'm trying to, because this is you're touching on something that's really interesting to me. The comedians, it's not even that they have a choice. Like, they have to get on stage because they have to get something out. And I think you're absolutely right. It always goes back to childhood and goes back to those different traumas or tragedies that you had in your life. And I'm just trying to touch on, though, the idea of, I don't think it's always a neuroses. I think it's just more of like an honesty or something like a desire for the approval you didn't get or something like that.
I call it neuroses because I think that gives you some. I knew somebody that was going through a very bad time, and everything was in conflict, and all this stuff was coming up. And I said, this is hurting you right now, but it'll help your comedy. Because you'll be able to taste almost the emotion and the energy that you went through when you experienced this. And if you bring this on stage, that's what, and that happened to be what was missing from this person's act.
Wow. Because
it was an energy, there's a depth. If you can be in touch with why you're really doing this. I don't mean why exactly you're doing it, Part of the reason I did it is my family did it. I had an aunt that was a stand-up comic. And, a totally different era and a totally different, but still, I mean the energy. Anyway.
Yeah, and also you saw that it was a possibility. It was in the realm of your world that it could be attainable.
Well, what was happening is I was doing a lot of off-Broadway stuff. And when I came to L.A., it was off-Broadway stuff. And I would do a lot of serious stuff, and everybody was hysterical. So that's really why I did it. Because I would.
Wait, what do you mean?
I would be doing scenes from Shakespeare. I was doing plays, Tennessee Williams, Eugene O'Neill, and people were laughing hysterically when it was a serious part. So that's one reason. And then my roots were monologues. But
wait a minute, why were they laughing?
Because I just put the funny in it, Tennessee Williams.
No, I don't know.
Tennessee Williams, when you look at Stella, there is on the edge of tragedy is comedy. On the edge of comedy is tragedy. So if you push it too much to the left or to the right, then you'll get the opposite response.
Okay. And we're going to get to your story because we're going to talk about Woodstock today because I know you were at Woodstock and you were one of the original dancers at Woodstock. But before we do, I want to ask you one more thing.
Okay.
So do you think like Robin Williams and Richard Jeni and these guys who tragically killed themselves, do you think that it had to do with comedy or their neuroses? I mean, are you saying something like in that general?
No, I'm saying that what you have to go through in comedy and what it brings up, in addition to your exposure, you're so exposed, you're naked. And especially if you're that successful, you're even more naked. And then I think it's the dichotomy between that pain and and I think with the more popular comics, the adulation. Yeah. I mean, this is all pop psychology, but I will admit I've been through it with people, and I've been around it.
No, I think
one thing we comics do well is grieve. I think.
No, you have a great perspective, Rachel, because you've known so many comedians. I mean, you had, and you're still working, you're still out there. But I mean, at one point when you were running that show at the Comedy Store, that was, you were like the main producer in town, and you saw everything.
Yeah, yes, and and I speak about it. I'm not afraid. A lot of people are afraid don't want to talk about death. I say it's inevitable, in a good way, because that makes us human.
It makes us appreciate the time we're here and all that, right?
Exactly, appreciate the time you're here, because when it's over, it's over.
Who are some of the comics you've always admired?
Of course, Robin, and I remember Steve Landesberg. Do you remember who Steve Landesberg was?
I didn't know him.
Very, very, very funny man. And of course, who's the most popular one now?
Dave Chappelle?
Dave Chappelle. I love Dave Chappelle. I love Wanda Sykes.
I love Wanda Sykes as well, yeah.
Because it just comes off her like butter. It's like butter off of her. She's one of my favorite female comedians. And I like what Sherry Shepherd has really held her own so beautifully. And she's been so criticized. And I think she just holds her own so well. She's really grown into a beautiful professional. Professional.
That's nice. Well, I'm very excited to hear your Woodstock story. So let's get over to that in just a second here. But go ahead. What were you going to say?
Not really. I was just going to say that, I got carried away with my admiration for Sherry because I think was very, very criticized.
Oh, yeah. Why was she criticized?
Oh, she was, her looks. She wasn't smart enough. She was too jokey. Everything you can imagine a comic can be criticized for.
Interesting.
You know what I mean? I'll never forget, I was criticized for this bit that I used to do. And I was working with some people at the Comedy Store who were coaches, and they said, "That's not funny. That is just not funny. Don't ever do that bit." And somebody calls me up, and they said, "Rachel, turn on the television. They're doing that bit, that crazy bit of yours." So you've got to be so careful
Who was
about
doing
what's
it?
Not funny.
Wait a minute. Who was doing it?
Who was doing it was on Fridays, the dentist was doing it.
Wow.
The guy that played the dentist. And I even know how it moved around from place to place. You know what I mean?
Wow, they stole your bit.
Ever listen. They stole the bit that wasn't funny.
Oh, my gosh.
But, as I said, I saw my family go through it too. My aunt, my aunt claimed that her name was Cookie Mack or Cookie Cohen. She claimed she taught Toady Fields everything she knew. Toady died 6 months after she did.
Oh, boy. Wow. All right, we're going to get over to your story in just a second, but before we do, I wanted to remind everybody that my other podcast, My Life in 3 Songs, is going strong over there on Spotify. Please check out the show, My Life in 3 Songs, on Spotify. You can download the app for free, of course, and it's right there, My Life in 3 Songs. Also, follow the show on social media at My Life in 3 Songs, and check out the website, mylifein3songs.com. All right, you guys, she's here right now. Rachel Lovey, you've heard her talking. She is a comedian and an acclaimed comic actress speaker. She was honored and roasted at the Friars Club, and she was featured on Fox Television for her long-running live show, Women in Comedy Who Don't Have a Series Yet. Rachel has a very entertaining blog spot. Haven't heard that word in a while, have you? She has a very entertaining blog spot. It's called Woodstock and Earthlight Revisited.blogspot.com. I can tell you put a lot of work into it, Rachel. It's a great little page there. And I'm super happy to have you on the show, Rach. Wherever you are, guys, put your hands together for the very talented Rachel Lovey.
Okay. So it's interesting that people say that I was at Woodstock. I performed and helped organize Woodstock. How this happened? Well, I was in New York the winter of '69, when I was only 12, of course. Anyway, I had just completed a kind of successful little run off Broadway. And my girlfriend told me she had a friend She was Italian, and she and a bunch of Italians were forming a little theater on Mulberry Street. Now, I'm not Italian, but I act like one often, and I identify with Italians. Anyway, at that time, it was on. It was in It was in Soho. We have NoHo. They had Soho. And the only thing on Mulberry Street, and it wasn't even called Soho, it was just South Houston. The only thing on Mulberry Street were mafia clubs. The old-fashioned mafia clubs that looked like storefronts, that looked like cleaners or laundromats, and people would come in and pay the money or do whatever they did. So literally we had mafia people come into our storefront, and we called it Treehouse 2. And we did little bits and pieces, sketches. We used to call them pits, little bits or pieces. And they were semi-spiritual. They weren't real spiritual, but they had a spiritual binge, as most things either had a spiritual or political binge in that time. Most avant-garde, that's a beautiful word that we don't use too much anymore, avant-garde theater. So the middle of the season, it must have been around March, we read that there is a barn in this theater, which was not all Italian, by the way. We read about this barn that was in White Lake, New York, and it could be converted to a theater. Well, we thought that was a great idea. We'd do summer stock in White Lake, New York. So we're in White Lake, and this is around April. So we started off with maybe 8. In the theater, there was maybe 8. Then it grew to 12. It grew to 15 and then shrunk. It was all different sizes. But at the time we went up to the theater, maybe 10 people. And we were in the theater rebuilding it. When we read in the newspaper, the Woodstock Festival was in trouble because where they were supposed to be in Walk Hill or Woodstock, nobody wanted anything to do with them because it was hippies, crazy hippies. They'd make a mess. We wrote them a letter. Alan Mann, who was my producer, wrote them a letter and said, we're right next door to Max Yasker's farm. This would be a great place to hold a festival. And my landlord, we had a landlord of the particular property we were on. My landlord knows him very well and is connected to him. And we think that the Max Yasker's farm would be a perfect place to do the festival. Of course, about 3 other people have another version of how the festival got to White Lake, but that is the version. Anyway, they hired us to be kind of the street theater at the festival, to run around the crowds. And we did a little bit on stage because it rained so much they needed filler. And we brought in Swami Satchidananda, which some people say is why the festival was so peaceful, because he set the tone, he set the vibe to start it off with the Swami, who was a wonderful man and very relatable. So we worked the festival. We worked and ran around. We were actually called the spiritual cheerleaders of the Woodstock Festival. And the festival was 10 minutes away from the theater site. That weekend, it was a 16-hour drive. And Joan Baez was running in the crowds sometimes with us and getting people to sing and do everything else. And everybody asked me who was the best. One of the best performances was Sly and the Family Stone. And, of course, Jimi Hendrix and Janis. And, I mean, there was so many, you just couldn't keep up with it. And everybody's sleeping together. Can you imagine all those people sleeping together? And it was, the interesting thing is that, where people ask me, were people stoned, were people on acid? Everyone almost was on acid. I did acid once, too often. But it was like what I was thinking of the other day, yet no one tried to hurt anybody. And acid is not a pretty drug. It doesn't, So we were paid $1,000, and we bought a bus painted with clouds. We ended up off Broadway in New York with one of the producers of the festival. And I didn't even talk about it when I came out here because, Charles Manson and the moonshot and, the war. And then in the late 80s, I hear on VH1 one of my bits that we did at the festival. And it was called, He Loves Me Not. And then we would all get into a circle and go, love, love, love. And we'd get everybody in a chain doing love, love, love. And then I don't know if you know about the Om Circle, which I even did at the Improv, where you got people together in a big circle and chant Om. And so, it was amazing. And I forgot. I was so into remembering hearing my voice on VH1, and this is in the mid-'80s, and then I realized that this was from the movie, and we actually did make it into the director's cut. We wore yellow robes that matched Swami Satchidananda, and we wore underneath that tie-dye loincloth, and it looked like we were naked because it was gold, kind of nude-colored, with dark tie-dye right in the pubic hairs of all places, right where pubic hairs would be. And if you look around, there are pictures, I was at an event the other day, and I saw, there's some actual pictures of us in there was a lot of art and a lot of stuff in galleries and theaters, and we did make it into that, and a lot of those pictures are on the blog.
Absolutely. No, the pictures are fabulous. But wait, I want to hear more about the actual day. Did
3
you
days.
and the other, the actual 3 days, exactly. Did you and the other dance?
Oh, and we weren't dancers. We weren't dancers. We just used a lot of movement. We were what they call, like in back California, it was the San Francisco Mime Troupe. We did meaningful, political, spiritual pieces that had a lot of movement in them.
Was the group called Earthlight?
It was called Earthlight, and sometimes it was called Earthlight Theater, but then it was called a theater troupe.
Okay, and so did your theater troupe involve men and women or just women?
Yes, men and women, oh yeah.
Okay, and so at Woodstock, those 3 days, I know a lot of the time you were all dressed the same. You had, whether it was the yellow dress or the robe or whatever. Yeah. So did you stay dressed the same the whole 3 days, and did you stay as a troupe the whole 3 days?
We were a troupe the whole 3 days. I think I'm sure we changed.
Right, and because I was seeing pictures of your theater group on stage. So you're on stage with a Swami, and it's, you guys are all sitting in like kind of that Om position on the stage, and there's like 500,000 people in front of you.
Yeah.
So what was that like? Tell me that feeling.
It was... Just being a part of the counterculture was the most wonderful experience I ever had. So Woodstock was like a blur. Most of it was like a blur, to tell you the truth. The actual being there was a blur. A lot of the stuff about Woodstock is what you remember. And it's been so photographed and televised and everything else. It was like a blur, and we were heavily stoned. That's what I don't understand, how I was so heavily stoned and was there. That's hard for me to. But I guess it was a blur. And then the rain and the mud and everybody kind of gelled together. It was very oneness. And I think that was much our mantra, that we are one.
Did you have sex with anybody that weekend?
Well, I don't think I did with my boyfriend. He was so pissed at me. I said, don't take the car from the theater. It was a 16-hour drive from the theater. I said, don't. Of course he did. He did a lot of the pictures, the guy that I was with. He did a lot of the pictures.
Oh, interesting. So why, were you guys fighting then? Is that what you're saying?
I don't remember. No, I didn't see him that much because he was in the car.
Do you remember what anybody was eating?
Oh, they had to bring in food. It's funny. If I have a piece I have a piece in the blog comparing it to the pandemic. They had to bring in food. I guess we brought stuff from the theater, and then the hog farm. You heard about the hog farm, which we should have been. Wavy Gravy. The hog farm was a commune that would go to events like this and would feed the people. And in the movie, you'd say, "Don't take the brown acid." And then the other thing that Wavy Gravy said, "We're here to celebrate 400,000 people and say good morning." It's in the movie.
Yeah.
And he's still alive.
Oh, that's wonderful. I didn't know that.
He's still alive. So many are gone.
Yeah, of course. Well, sure. Yeah, it's such an iconic period. And I have another buddy, my buddy George Halter, who was also at Woodstock with his wife. And they're both good friends of mine. And yeah, they still talk about it. They still remember, and they just say it was like the best times of their lives.
Yeah. Well, it was a dream. And fortunately for us, after the Woodstock gave us that jump that we were able to tour nationally and off-Broadway. So we continue the era because we brought people up at the end of the show. And I think we did it at Woodstock too. Yeah. We brought people into our circle at the end of the show, and we'd chant Om. We worked with a rock and roll group. Eventually we got together with a music group. Because we were very musical, even when we weren't doing singing, we were very musical.
Yeah, sure. And so were you guys also naked together, or did it just look like you were all naked?
We looked like we were naked. During the off-Broadway show, there were two people naked. We did one naked show. We did one naked show before we actually formed and before we got into our new reality of being an off-Broadway show. But of course, people were doing naked shows.
Yeah, it wasn't a big deal. Hair was out. And I'm sure there were other shows. Now, what did your family think of you going off and doing this sort of life? Did your mom and dad have any say in it? And did your siblings have any say in what was going on?
My mom and dad kind of were always, my mom particularly, were avoiding the inevitable. They were avoiding the inevitable that I would follow in this my aunt's profession. Not as a comic, but they were in the business. They didn't know what to make of this. They didn't know exactly what was on. But the wonderful thing is that I started doing little psychedelic art. I'm not a very good artist, but I would do the colors when I wrote to them. And my father started doing it back to me. He started sending me psychedelic postcards that he would do his little art.
That's so sweet.
And of course, he had to contend with it with his own sisters, which I'm sure in their days was pretty wild as well. Not that they were that wild, but it was a wild life. And I'm sure they were frightened, but I don't know if they knew exactly what was going on. And I had some other tragedies in my family, so sad but true, they could concentrate on that.
Yeah, they weren't as worried about you, and they trusted your judgment.
Yeah, as I said, I still to this day have those little psychedelic postcards my father sent to me. And when I was doing comedy, my father used to drive with me to some gigs, and we'd write jokes.
That's so sweet, yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. That's really nice, Rachel. Such incredible memories.
Yep.
I never had anybody on Storyworthy talking about Woodstock, and I've had over 750 guests. So this is good. I'm really glad to actually talk about the day. Yeah, and it was like we heard that terrible things were being said. They had to bring in the army, and they did drop food. Well, yeah, they did. They brought in the National Guard, didn't they?
I don't think they brought in the National Guard I think mostly for the food. They were worried about food. There wasn't anything, I mean, it was a miracle. It was just a miracle. Can you imagine? 12 people can't get together nowadays without somebody being violent. I mean,
I know.
And what I'm feeling is that we need to reclaim, it's funny, I love that Back to the Garden, that Joni Mitchell, I love her, and she's been a miracle herself. She just had a stroke, and now she's on singing, and anyway, she sings Back to the Garden. So when I wrote my last blog recently, we need to get back to the garden. We need to reclaim that peace and love, and these things do exist, but we have to claim them. It can't be somewhere out in space, out in this vague thing. You have to have it within yourself, and comics can be so miserable sometimes. I mean, and they're so wonderful at the same time. But it's a hard profession. It's a very hard profession.
Well, it is, but I think that what you're talking about is their passion is so attractive, and comedians are so confident. It's very attractive to see people go up on stage and have a point of view. But what they don't maybe realize is that the comedian can often be just completely, shaken inside, not being able to get across what they want to say, or then again, just getting caught up in stage time and how do you get on stage. And, there's just so much to it. Just surviving in LA is a miracle, let alone.
Right. So part of it, though, going back to that, tying that Woodstock thing together, is that keeping that with you when you find it. Some people say meditate, do this, do that. Just if you find some peace, some happiness, claim it, keep it with you, even if things they're not going so hot. That you experience that, just like we experienced Woodstock. So whatever, it did happen. It did happen.
Yeah, it sure did. 500,000 people. I'll bet nobody, or 400,000 people. I'll bet nobody had a gun in that crowd.
You're right.
Right.
I think someone did get killed. They got run over by a tractor.
I see. Listen, we got to wrap this up, but I want to thank you so much, Rachel, for coming on the show and sharing this story. I mean, it's an important story. It's important for people to remember and, like you said, to claim it. I mean, there was an era, there was proof that it can happen. It did happen. And recently on television, I watched the documentary on Woodstock 99. It was Woodstock 99, and they called it Trainwreck, and it was so flipping good. It was about how that gathering completely failed. So you guys check that out if you want to see a great Netflix special, Trainwreck. And anyway, we're going to wrap it up. I want to thank again Rachel Lovey so much for coming on the show. And you guys should check out Rachel Lovey and her blog spot. Again, it's Woodstock and Earthlight Revisited.blogspot.com. All right, you guys, one more time on behalf of the very talented Rachel Lovey. Thank you so much, Rachel.
Thank you very much for having me, and good luck. You're doing a wonderful job, and congratulations on all your success. Keep it up.
My name is Christine Blackburn, saying, make it a story-worthy week.
Thanks for joining us on the Storyworthy Podcast. We'll be back next week with all new stories. Subscribe to Storyworthy on iTunes and visit the Storyworthy website at storyworthypodcast.com.